The Durian Heat, bringing big ideas and critical opinions in Southeast Asia.
Hi, this is Arlene.
Welcome back, this is Grace.
And of course, you are with us on our second segment of today, where we discuss critical issue on Southeast Asia. And today is the day where we discuss about an issue that has been in the minds of a lot of Southeast Asian, not just Indonesian or Filipinos or even Australians, but globally, people were not happy about the death penalty that were being used against the Bali 9, although one of the lives, which is Mary Jane, was spared.
Well, this is something that everyone was hoping and prayed for, because after all, just reading her status about her stories and also other people's, the stories about Mary Jane itself, she's not the main person when it comes to this situation of human trafficking or even drug smuggling. She was not the face of the whole this situation. She was actually the victim of all this perpetrator who actually just put herself in the situation to make her things like that. And she was just caught at the airport, and she when security guards checked her bag, even then she didn't know what was going on. She just wondered at that point, and then she would just gladly accept the offer, according to her story, because she was financially struggling to send one of the sons to the school, and he was at the age. So there were also other videos of these two sons sending out the messages to President of Indonesia, Joko Widodo, and that was really heartbreaking to watch how two sons were just to want to send their messages to the president to save their mom.
It's kind of scary if you look at this, because on one hand, you want to put your trust in the legal system in Indonesia. But on another hand, with people like Mary Jane, who is not educated, who doesn't know her rights as a citizen, who are being duped into human trafficking, could be faced by, are facing such a severe punishment only at the very last minute that President Joko Widodo making the decision to spare the life of Mary Jane. Without the civil society fighting and trying to campaign for her tirelessly, she would have died in vain. It's kind of scary to think about it.
It is very scary. If it wasn't the people who actually worked really hard towards to save Mary Jane, it wouldn't just ended up this way. And it just happened last night. Think about it. It didn't happen a few days ago, a few weeks ago. The decision was made last night.
Yeah, and I can definitely see why people are not happy about the case of Mary Jane, because only at the very last minute that Joko Widodo made the decision. He could have made the decision earlier. He could have investigated how or even give clemency earlier, because at the end of the day, you want the justice system in Indonesia to be seen as upholding justice and fairness.
And at the same time, after the news of Mary Jane's that she is her execution was spared, there was sort of mixed feeling of the comments, feedback coming from the public, that some of them actually thank Joko Widodo, but some of them actually blame even more towards Joko Widodo, that why didn't you do it even before? Why didn't you consider earlier? And then you are the one who actually gave the heartbreaking news to the families and the friends of Mary Jane.
It's such an irony, because with the case of Mary Jane, you would think that the president would have learned his lesson, especially when his people, Indonesian mates, were being abused, were being wrongly accused in countries like Saudi Arabia, and quite frankly, a few of them were being killed and were not being judged rightly through the justice system that were questionable in, for example, countries like Saudi Arabia. So for Joko Widodo, if he is really serious at saving his own people in the Middle East from their questionable justice system, he should correct his justice system in Indonesia to make sure that people like Mary Jane, they are being seen as victims, and maybe they could be used as a witness to identify real perpetrators of drug smuggling or drug or whoever that is committing crimes that would jeopardize Indonesia's reputation.
Why is it so that the Indonesia is so strict towards this drug smuggling or human trafficking? The punishment of this the crime in the country, it's so strict, and it's one of the toughest law.
Actually, I do not want to just blame Indonesia, because I know that in Malaysia, Singapore, and I think almost all of the countries, except for 2 countries in Southeast Asia, we still use death penalty as a way to punish drug smugglers. And it's quite sad, because you would think that when ASEAN saying that it's a people-centered country, it is a people-centered region, it foresees itself as pushing forwards human rights in a direction where it will provide freer flow of people and mobility and a more strengthened institution. But at the end of the day, the law in Southeast Asia is still very much a colonial law, a law that would punish people an eye for an eye. And in the case of Indonesia, they still use firing squad. Who else used that other than probably China?
Yes, and it's quite cruel and at the same time quite disturbing. And after that, the families, friends, they will be receiving the bodies after it is that they are executed. So all this procedure, and then at the end, the capital punishment, it is something to be considered again and again, because it relates to human rights. Human is as being human beings, we can learn things from our mistakes.
But what about in South Korea? Do you still use capital punishment?
We have capital punishment, in fact.
Too bad.
Yes.
Actually, a lot of the countries do have capital punishment, including don't close one eye, which is the US. They have probably one of the largest population that goes through capital punishment. So I do not want to blame Indonesia for having outdated laws. I think a lot of the countries throughout the world have outdated laws as well, laws that are totally inhuman. But what I admire, like regions in, for example, the European Union, one of their strongest campaign was to end death penalty, and I think it was a Southeast Asian campaign, if I'm not mistaken, because in Malaysia they actually tried to create awareness how death penalty will not reduce crimes, it will not create any awareness, or it will not deter anyone else to stop doing any activity that is illegal. It would in fact increase the dissatisfaction of people. I guess in a way that the family of those that have to go through the ordeals of death penalty when of their loved ones, they might not be happy about it.
Of course, they will not be happy. And at the same time, just to give a little bit of facts regarding the drug laws and the penalties in Southeast Asia, perhaps I just go country by country and see what has happened so far. The drug laws in Cambodia, death penalty was abolished in Cambodia. However, the law on the control of drugs is actually quite severe and quite strict. And for those caught with the controlled substances, at least on the paper, the law in Cambodia, the punishment is for 5 years, or from 5 years to lifetime in prison. And then the laws in Indonesia, like we already know about how is it going to happen. But moving on to Laos, the criminal code of Laos penalized the possession of all these drugs will be a penalty for the offenses from 10 years imprisonment. And in Malaysia, Malaysia is quite well known for sort of competing against the Singapore the law in this harshness towards the suspected drug traffickers. And we do, even though there are a lot of the illegal drug smuggling coming in, when it comes to long jail sentences and the capital punishment, it is still one of the strict law in Southeast Asia. And then talking about the Philippines, they prescribe the death penalty for drug traffickers caught within at least zero point 0.3 ounce of all those drugs elements, at least to 17 ounces of marijuana. Also, the Philippines has imposed this bad death penalty, but drug offenders are still punished harshly when it is caught. So in Filipino, there is no death penalty in that country. But moving on to Thailand, they prescribe the death penalty for carrying category such as narcotics, like heroines, for the purpose of disposal. So a death penalty for drug trafficking has not been imposed since 2004, but rehabilitation counseling is often imposed on these convicted drugs users. And lastly, in Vietnam, it strictly enforces its drug laws. And as is stated in Article 203 of the Vietnamese Criminal Code, the possession of drug in the quantities larger than 1.3 ounce gets you the mandatory death sentence. And in fact, in 2007, around 85 people were executed for drug-related offenses.
Wow. So you see how drug has been like quite a serious crime in Southeast Asia. Let's go back one step behind. Why
Sure.
drugs is such a huge market in Southeast Asia? I think drugs, when it comes to drugs, most of them, where is it? I mean, we need to ask this question, like, why Southeast Asia is a huge region for human trafficking, for drug trafficking, for smuggling of drugs? Is it because we are a huge market users of drugs, or is it because we actually transport it from here directly, here meaning Southeast Asia, directly to countries like Australia, the UK, and other first world countries?
In fact, the plant that actually that people use for drugs are also widely grown in Southeast Asia. That's when
I think that answers it.
yes, that's when the people are interested, and then just to put it in the easy words, it's the simplest and easiest to get money from and to sell outside of Southeast Asia.
So because you want to say that drugs is a huge crime and problem in Southeast Asia, is kind of not true in a way, although there are people who are drug addicts. But I think on the larger scale, a lot of these drugs are being used by countries, first world countries, and they are smuggled out of Southeast Asia. And of course, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore are one of the key, I would say, transportation channel for these drug smugglers.
And then there are a lot of plants that are sort of created by all those plant seeds flying from the different countries. So they created another new sort of drugs. And this is one of the stories that I heard from my friend. And that really does happen in certain regions. For example, Indonesia, there will be a place in Aceh also, and there will be an area where there are just the new kinds of drug plants just growing up. Then people will be interested because that's a new form of a drug, and then they can just perhaps get the plants from that area and then to sell to the other countries.
I do know that in Cambodia there's a happy pizza. That's all I can say. Anyway, talking about Mary Jane, I want to go back to her because I do want to applaud the families and the civil society especially, working tirelessly trying to spread the awareness of her conviction and trying to give the last whatever opportunity that they can have to save her from being executed. And it was at the 11th hour, of course, the president stopped or spared the life of Mary Jane. But on the other hand, like, what's next? What's next for Mary Jane? Is her conviction to be executed just being delayed, or is Indonesia interested to retrial her so that she get a more fairer and a more justice verdict of what she have done in the past?
It is quite hard to answer, but however, as long as people keep on working on for her justice, then that should be a positive news after all. Because even the decisions that just made at last minute last night, it was just a sort of miracle, and people were really happy to hear that her execution was spared compared to the other execution that was on the other Bali 9 also traffickers.
Anyway, we'll take one short break. When we return, we will discuss further on the way forward for Mary Jane, as well as, not to forget, the other 8 convicts of the Bali 9 that were unfortunately executed early this morning.
The Durian Heat, bringing big ideas and critical opinions in Southeast Asia.
Hi, this is Arlene.
And welcome back, this is Grace.
And of course, you are with us again on the Durian Heat, where we talk about critical issues in Southeast Asia. And of course, this time is about Mary Jane's execution. But you know, besides Mary Jane, another 8 lives were not spared. And of course, among the 8 lives, the 2 most infamous ones were the 2 Australians, which were Andrew Chan and Muran Sukumaran.
And there were one of the key drug traffickers, and it just took place this morning. And even though with all this international pleas for the killings not to go ahead, the execution did happen. And except like you mentioned, the Mary Jane, but also other 8 prisoners are set to face the firing squad. And one of the executed victims were called the Mr. Chan, or Andrew Chan's brother, who's Michael. He'd been fighting so long for his this justice, and also he finally tweeted on his social media saying that I have just lost my brother to a flawed Indonesian legal system. And I wonder what will happen the relationship between Australia and Indonesia from now on, because Australia, the country itself, also has been working tirelessly and continuously to send out their messages to Indonesia.
Unfortunately, the Australian government have been working at trying to save the 2 men from recrimination, but Prime Minister Tony Abbott cannot do anything, no matter how strong a message he has sent to Indonesia. And this is quite sad, I guess, because we used to believe that Australia is a strong country, but I guess it's not. And especially when it comes to the case with Indonesia.
Yes, that's true. And it is really saddening because there were a lot of Q&A sessions going on, before the execution did happen. And a lot of people, even from Australia, the Australians were holding a lot of banners and papers to send out their messages via social media, and make it really viral posts regarding this Bali 9 drug traffickers. However, their hopes and their prayers just didn't meet their expectations. And a lot of people did say that they have a sort of different image of Joko Widodo after the execution.
Yeah, you can't mess with him. He's an Iron Man. But from the Australian side, these are the action that they might be taken in case I guess they might be considering taking it up because both men were already being executed. Okay, I'm going to list down all the different areas that the Australian government is thinking of putting pressure on Indonesia. One of it is withdrawing the ambassador, something that Australia has never done in response to any execution. And second is cutting the 600 million in aid Australia will give Indonesia this year. I think this is a good suggestion. And the third one, pulling out of the annual leaders meeting in Indonesia. And the fourth is pulling out of the regular 2+2 gatherings of defense and foreign minister, where of course Australia has been helping a lot in terms of trying to enhance the defense system in this region. And the next one is suspending other ministerial contact, suspending any meetings that involve departmental secretaries and deputy secretaries, suspending the Marriott routine meetings of officials on issues such as defense, law and education, refusing to offer support to Indonesia for things that it wants in international forums, and of course not sending a high-ranking officer to mark the retirement of the head of Indonesian Armed Forces and General Muldoko in July.
So a lot of things have listed after this incident.
But this, I mean, all this will
Right.
definitely hurt Indonesia, but I'm not sure how much of it will hurt Indonesia in the long run, because at the same time, these are areas that Australian government would not do. One is doing anything that hurt Australia's trade or tourism. Second is getting involved in any kind of tit-for-tat economic sanction. This is, of course, the infamous American sanction against Cuba, which has yet to be, I think it have just been uplifted. And of course, for Australian government, they would not reduce cooperation between the Australian Federal Police and Indonesian National Police. So they still need each other in a way in terms of defense and security. Yeah, especially with the growing threats of radicalization and religion.
So in fact, Indonesia recalled its ambassador from Australia and suspended the cooperation in several areas over this incident, including the efforts to stop people smuggling boats reaching Australia. And Australia's the military-led efforts to turn back the boats also angered Indonesia, of course, with tensions growing last year, and that's when Indonesia wanted to work even harder to strengthening this military security force. And after and that's also regarding the entering Southeast East Asian nation, the territorial waters. So with this in mind, everything, Mr. Abbott was careful with his words, actually, and he said, "I don't want to make a difficult situation worse by offering graded reflections on different aspects of the way this matter has been handled in recent days and week." And as for President Widodo, he's a new president, and his election was attended with a great promise. So he regards himself as a friend of Indonesia, and he thinks that this vast majority of Australians regards themselves as friends of Indonesia. And he hopes that the presidency is a successful one, and while this is a dark moment in the relationship, true enough, between Australia and Indonesia, but he's also confident that the relationship will be restored for the great benefits for both our countries. But the situation here, it's not just not to focus on the relationship between Australia and Indonesia, but it's more like how the civils, the people from each country, they have been fighting so long for this particular incident, and then it happened yesterday, except for Mary Jane. So it'll be just from the people's perspectives and point of view, it'll be just get to worse and worse. On the social media and other channels they can voice out.
A lot of people might not realize this. Both of them, I'm talking about the two Australian that were executed. One is 31 years old, another one is 34, and they have been in jail for the last 10 years. So can you imagine they were in prison when they were only 21 years old and 24 years old. So it shows that these are really young people who didn't know what they were doing at that time. And I think Joko Widodo also need to understand the socio-economic dimension of why they did what they did. A lot of them is because they were lured by I guess they were lured by the socio-economic in a way, it's the money that make them do what they do.
Right.
But it's not because they were the mastermind of the whole thing, but they were they were driving themselves towards doing such action in terms of drug smuggling is because they themselves are not earning enough money. Yeah. So I guess we need to look at the bigger picture here, why people are driven to do such crimes, and having such harsh punishment, you will not deter people. You just make people smarter at avoiding from being detected.
That could be the sort of side effects by having this harsh punishment towards a certain crimes and acts. And in fact, the country outside of this Indonesia and Australia, the Brazilian government, in fact, they said that they were really shocked by this news. But not only to Brazil, but all over the world, which marked the second execution of a Brazilian in Indonesia, because one of them was Brazilian, in 3 months, despite the President Dilma Rousseff personal humanitarian appeals to Indonesian government. And also Brazilian Foreign Ministry, they expressed that it was evaluating ties with Indonesia before deciding what action to take. But also it had no plans at present to replace its former ambassador in Jakarta, who had been recalled after the first execution in January this year. So given the lack of a satisfactory reply to their appeals, this has to be evaluated to decide what attitude we will adopt towards Indonesia from now on. So this is not only the relationship between Australia and Indonesia, but it also regards the relationship between Brazil and Indonesia furthermore.
So, I mean, to further address to what I've said earlier, that, for example, Muran Sukumaran, he was arrested when he was still in university, and he was involved with party and the drug scene, and of course, the promise of making quick money. And these are the reason why people get into all this drug smuggling or drug trafficking. I mean, if you go to Australia, if you go to Europe, they even make drugs usage legal, of course, to up to a certain amount. So in a way, I think we need to review certain laws when it comes to drugs. Personally, I think I don't want to promote taking drugs especially among the younger generation, but I do not think that it's wise for governments to put such a harsh punishment towards those that use drugs. I think we need to understand the psychology of why people use drugs in the first place. Is it really a psychological problem, or is it truly an addiction that the government need to address to education, awareness, to health and services, sort of understanding of society?
Yes, and it is very important to hear their stories first of all before they are put to the final decisions. And not only Mary Jane, but there's one more person who are put on the temporary reprieve, whose name is Serge Atlatou. He's French, and he was due to be executed this week, but has been delayed pending a legal challenge. He was arrested for working in the factory used to produce the ecstasy, and he claims that he was working as a welder and was unaware of illegal activity. So that's right, Arlene, what you mentioned. And a lot of people are not really aware what they what kind of situation they have put themselves into. So it is also important from the government side to perhaps make a campaign or public information to send out the direct messages when which one is illegal activity, and the consequences after that they have to face. Not in this procedure or this sort of whole long period of torturing not only them but also the families and friends of them.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, I think what we are looking at here is saving Mary Jane. Of course, we can't do anything much about the other 8 convicts of the Bali 9. For Mary Jane itself, I think what the people, especially her lawyers, are looking at is to address issues regarding on how to get a clemency, not just from the prime minister, so not just from the president, but also trying to correct the justice system to ensure that all avenues are being exhausted in any way that they can. Because at the end of the day, I think she is the victim of circumstances. That's one thing that Indonesia need to address in its justice system. How can it utilizes people like Mary Jane to address like real drug issues that is happening in Indonesia?
So there are still a lot of updates coming on the news and also a lot of other news channels. So I hope we can keep our eyes on what will happen to Mary Jane, even though she's just put on the temporary reprieve. But then people will still work for it, and then hopefully that their voices are heard to Indonesian government.
But if you notice, countries around Southeast Asia, when it comes to governments, they are quite silent about Indonesia. They don't really put that much pressure, or they are just also the same old culprit. They're just quiet about it because, hey, we are also having death penalty here, so we do not want to make a huge hoo-ha about it.
Perhaps that could be one of the reasons, in fact.
I'm quite disappointed at the ASEAN level. These kind of issues are not being discussed thoroughly at the ASEAN summit. You know, you have to have countries like Australia, people like the civil society to put such amount of pressure to Jokowi. But I think the best pressure should come from within Southeast Asia, which is the ASEAN organization. They should be the one critically discussing such issue and give the proper recommendation to Jokowi.
That's correct, because still quite a number of Southeast Asia countries, they practice this death penalty. And then when it comes to such cases which are very vital and it's one of the hot topics worldwide, have been discussed for a long time, needs to be addressed also by the ASEAN organization as well, because after all these people are from Southeast Asia. And not only from the Philippines or Australia or even Indonesia, other countries, there are neighboring countries, need to discuss, express their concerns, and also perhaps what are the steps they need to take towards this death penalty in as a organization, ASEAN itself.
I think death penalty should be one of the agenda in ICHR, and of course it is going to be one of the agenda being discussed at ICHR. ICHR is the ASEAN Intergovernmental Human Rights Commission, and I personally hope that the new principle of ASEAN should be the right to life. Countries in Southeast Asia should abolish that penalty and should follow the principle of the right to life, where people should have the right to live no matter what kind of crimes they commit, especially crimes related to drugs. I don't think they should be killed because of that. It should be a lesson for Southeast Asian leaders to understand if they continue to do so, they might jeopardize the international relationship that we have formed throughout the decades. It's not easy, for this region to come together and to be able to gauge with our neighbors and gain the trust. So we don't want to be like Indonesia, where the trust between Australia and Indonesia, and of course with Brazil now, has been totally being just diminished.
Well, that's also another question when it comes to working as a whole one organization towards the certain issues. Also because of the different government system and also different mindsets that even the from the grassroots are holding towards working towards to become one ASEAN identity. And this regarding this incident of Balina, and also as well as Mary Jane, this definitely leads to human rights. And then I'm sure there are a lot of organizations, NGOs especially, and also activists who come up with their ideas and then also they voiced out towards this incident. However, where is the ASEAN voice from
especially from Malaysia? I think Najib should have said something to somehow address the concern of ASEAN on the death penalty, especially towards Mary Jane. Yeah.
Because in fact the president of the Philippines, he actually voiced out and he did discuss with Joko Widodo, and even at the ASEAN summit which was just held recently. And perhaps that could be one of the reasons why he reconsidered towards the Mary Jane. But how about the other people that were already executed just this morning?
Yeah, I think with that, it's a lesson. It's a tough lesson to be learned in Southeast Asia. when it comes to ASEAN, there's still a long way to go in terms of trying to absorb the principle of the right to live, and hopefully Mary Jane will find the justice and fairness that she has been longing for. For 10 years she has been behind the bars, so I think it's time for her to be able to be set free. And for Indonesia, it's time for them to review back their outdated colonial law and try to see drugs as not as a criminal offense, but more of a psychological addiction that should be addressed thoroughly.
Yes, and also we also hope that with this incident, especially the Mary Jane incident, the government, not only from Indonesia but also whole Southeast Asia governments, needs to double and triple check on this smuggling, drug smuggling, as well as human trafficking.
With that, I'm Arlene signing off for the day today.
And this is Grace. And don't forget to look for us at our main channel, which is our website, durianasian.com. And we do also have our social channels, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram.
And of course, you can always listen to us on the go on your mobile by downloading the TuneIn app, and of course search for Durian ASEAN.